I invite you then to open your Bibles, please, to Ephesians chapter 4, Ephesians chapter 2, or 4, and remember, chapter 4, yes, sorry. Remember the memory verse that we just went over, verse 1 talks about walking worthy. We've not left that. We've not left that idea of walking worthy, and I'm just going to put a beautiful shoe up here. These are going to make a point, all right? But we're talking about walking. That's really through this whole chapter about our spiritual walk. So keep that in mind. We'll point to these shoes in a moment here. I don't know if you are familiar with Shakespeare's play Hamlet. You're really familiar with anybody? Really familiar? Yeah, a couple of you are. I'm impressed because I struggled with anything to have to do with Shakespeare when I had to look at it. But Shakespeare is the one that was credited with saying, "Clothes make the man." I think it was in a pun type thing. If some of you guys want to, it was kind of a pun type way he said it there. But I like what Mark Twain said. He had a little different twist on it when he said, "Clothes make the man. Naked people have little or no influence in society." Yeah, we get that one, right? Psychologists insist that what we wear impacts us and others around us. Now, I don't know how you dressed this morning, but I'll have you know I have my birthday tie on. You've never seen this tie before. Oh, it just makes me feel, well, I don't know if it really does, but maybe some of you, isn't it true though, you wear certain clothes and it just they just kind of fit and they just kind of feel right? Is that true? Okay, yeah, okay, all right, good. I'm not the only one, yeah. And, another psychologist made the observation then, he said you have to see and feel clothes to kind of influence your psyche. To kind of really, you got to kind of put it on, you got to check yourself out in the mirror and that kind of a thing. And of course, why do the department stores have all those mirrors in there? They want you to, get that feeling, right? And you really, sometimes we dress to impress and all that kind of thing. And so, but as I was thinking about and looking at some of these ideas that are there from the psychologists, I thought, you know what? Paul probably knew that. Paul probably understood something about clothes, and as he uses the illustration of clothes in our passage here to compare a spiritual idea. So he uses the idea of the spiritual context, talking about old and new and putting off and putting on and that kind of a thing in our context. I think he has that sense that we identify in that way. And the reason I brought my shoes here is to show you that in this context we're going to see the old. I'm not even going to touch that one again, and the new. I have an old shoe here, and I don't care much about that old shoe. It's got mud on it. It's got a hole in the side. It's got it's seen more than better life. But this is my new shoe. And if I'm going to run a race, if I'm going to get some I'm going to put on my new shoe so I don't come back hobbling. And but if I got a little yard work, a little something, going to get wet or whatever, I might slip on this one. And so the difference between the old and the new. But in our context, we're going to talk about putting on the new, getting rid of the old. And, we could probably fool each other, even in our spiritual walk. We could probably fool someone else, but we could never fool ourselves when it comes to, we don't really fool ourselves or fool God when it comes to our spiritual walk. And I want to challenge you today as we think about our spiritual walk and our spiritual relationship with the Lord. Don't think about, boy, they really need that one. Let the Word speak to you. Let's see how you're challenged as we think about, because all of us are challenged daily, probably, with whether or not we have on the new as opposed to the old. We're challenged in that way. In this context, the grammar is kind of interesting. It identifies the three words that are going to make up our outline here. The three words of put off, be renewed, and put on. Those three words are all the same. They're all infinitives in the Greek. And I know if you're not a grammarian, that doesn't mean much. But they stand out as you look at it in the original. And they're there to demonstrate the outcome of the hearing and learning the truth in Jesus. So as we're going to read, we're going to back up a little bit. We're going to back up in our context here in Ephesians chapter 4, and we're going to try to get a little bit of a feel. And so back up with me to verse 20, I believe it is. Back up to verse 20 of Ephesians 4. And he says, in a contrast to what went on before, where he was talking about the way not to walk as the Gentiles walk. In other words, Christians don't walk like the world. That's not where you belong. And that's what he picks up in verse 20. But you have not so learned Christ. You haven't learned Christ the way that the world walks. Verse 21. If indeed you have heard him and have been taught by him, as the truth is in Jesus. The truth in Jesus. That's the focus that we're looking at. And he goes on, picking up in verse 22, what about that truth? How does that truth play out? How does it practically come into practice? And in verse 22, that you put off concerning your former conduct the old man, which grows corrupt according to the deceitful lusts, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on the new man, which is created after God in true righteousness and holiness. And so you just see this simple idea. And it is a simple concept here that we're looking at. You put off the old and you put on the new, and in the middle you get your mind renewed in order to really accomplish this. Put off, put on. That's the focus that we're going to have today. And so as we pick up in point number 1, I used the word make because clothes make the man. So make the old man, but the idea of the old man, we got to put him off. And so the sense is to put off. And the word for put off is literally to place it from you. Push it away. Place something away from you. That's the sense of put off in this context. It's the word that is used in Acts chapter 7 and verse 58 of the guys who wanted freedom to murder Stephen. So they put off their clothes, piled them at the feet of a dude named Saul, so they could be free to throw those rocks and to stone Stephen. So they put off their clothes. It's also the word used in Hebrews chapter 12 in verse 1, where it says, lay aside every weight or sin that easily besets you. But it's in the sense of, if you want to run the spiritual race, and of course, if some of you have run races before, if you want to run a race, you don't put on poor shoes. You don't you don't keep your winter coat on. I mean, you strip down. And in Paul's day, they stripped down and they ran naked. They didn't want any encumbrance at all. And so he's borrowing that idea. Put it off. Take off anything that will hold you back, so that you could run the race set before you. And he applies it spiritually right away. And so this idea the idea in our context here of putting off the old man is the sense, it's in the spiritual sense, and but it is the responsibility of the believer. It is the responsibility of the believer. Now, it's not that you have to do this on your own, but in the middle voice in the Greek, the action comes back to the person, and then the responsibility lies at each and every one of our feet, so to speak, that we would put off the old man and everything connected with him. And we're going to see the sense that he doesn't belong to us. How do you do that? It's an act of faith. It's an act of faith where we step out in faith to put off the old man. And we'll give you some background and a little more meat as we go on. The old man that we're to put off, he's contrasted to the new in verse 24. I mean, just this simple idea. Take that old man off and put on the new. The old man is the man that we had prior to salvation. When we think of the old man, he's the man that everyone is born with. Everyone is born with that old man sin nature, if you will, and we're born in sin. It's the natural man, it's the carnal man, he's the fleshly man. He has no spiritual content to him at all. He's described in our context here as the former lifestyle. It's the former lifestyle. And so he's inseparable from that. And if you picture the Gentile world in Paul's day, they get saved as adults, and they have a lifestyle that might be a total wreck. It's tied together with the idea in their background of idol worship and immorality, even connected to their religion. Even connected to their religion, they have that kind of thing. And so when he says, yeah, this other lifestyle, they can click with it. Now, if Vince was up here preaching, Vince would probably tell us that in his life it was alcohol. If somebody else was up here, they might say, well, for me it was dishonest business practice. For somebody else, they might say, oh, it was immorality. For someone else, they might say, and the list could go on. Well, I was just a habitual liar, and whatever it was, whatever it is. For some of us that were saved at 5 years old, like me, but you know what? I got that same old stinking old man. That same old man is still around, in the sense that I can still fall into any situation and any problem. You might can you see the dot on the end of my tongue, my thumb, little blood blister there? I got one right under my thumbnail. And I tell you, when I picked up, I was putting a door in place in the frame, and I slipped a little bit, and the next thing you know, I'm holding this door and frame by my thumbnail right there, until it fell apart, and dropped on my toe. And this was Monday, and of course I said, "Oh, praise you, Jesus, for..." Well, you don't believe me? I will. Don't you believe me that I was so thankful? I was so thankful that what I was really. Stuff goes through your mind, I tell you, awful quick. It was hanging there on my thumb for an instant, and then the frame broke. And I'm glad it did. Who knows what had happened if it had continued to hang there and whatever. But so thank you, Jesus, that the frame broke. That they make such junky door anyway. The old man is right there. The old man is right there. He's right there, and in an instant. Things can change. In an instant, we can put on the old man. He's corrupt with deceitful lusts. The old man is rotten to the core. And I thought I would bring a little illustration here today that goes beyond the shoe. I want the shoes here for the idea of walk, but here's my old man coat, all right? I'm putting on the old man coat here. And if you could, isn't it beautiful? We just got this. And I wrote all sorts of things all over this just to give you that. I went through Galatians chapter 5, and I wrote down the works of the flesh. They're written all over this coat. I had fun tearing it to shreds with I broke a scissors trying to do then I took my knife out and just kind of, but I think a lot of times we think in our spiritual life, we think that we're just going to fix up the old man. That's all religion can do. All religion can do is kind of, I'll just cover this up a little bit. It has no power, no energy, no ability to transform anything. And our former lifestyle, no matter how old you were when you were saved, when he's talking about the old man, this old man is corrupt and he's rotten to the core. The old man in us is just as dark and understanding, ignorant, blind, and callous and immoral as any unbeliever that we read about in verses 17 to 19. The old man is rotten to the core. But Romans chapter 6, and I want you to turn there with me briefly. Romans chapter 6. We're not going to delve into the whole context here, but it tells us that our old man has been crucified with Christ. In other words, the cross is where the power is. It's the remedy for the old man. It's not just the remedy for salvation, it's the remedy to live the victorious Christian life. It's at the cross. So in Romans chapter 6 and verse 6, knowing this, that our old man was crucified with him. This whole context, by the way, is about the power of the cross. This whole context is about the ability that we can have to live the Christian life in victory, that we don't have to sin, etc. We don't have to let the old man triumph. We don't have to carry him around. We don't have to have him on all the time. And in verse 6 there, he was crucified, that the body of sin might be put away, that we might no longer be slaves to sin. For he who has died has been freed from sin. What's the point? We're so identified with the death of Jesus Christ that the old man is crucified, the old man is put off, and that's really what we're saying. You can't put off the old man on your own. You're responsible, but you can't put him off on your own. You have to count him dead. Skip down to verse 11 in this context. This is a powerful, powerful verse that you could probably spend the rest of your life studying this context. Likewise, you also reckon yourselves to be dead to sin, but alive to God in Christ Jesus our Lord. Keep that verse in mind. Count the reality of the cross to be true in your spiritual life. That when it comes to the old man, when it comes to any of these sins that I scribbled on here, there's uncleanness, there's carnal, there's murder, there's blasphemy, whatever it is, you come back to the cross and you count it dead because God says it's dead. The spiritual life and walk, even after salvation. Yes, salvation is by grace through faith. But the spiritual walk is by faith as well. It's not trying harder. If you have the old man on and you try harder, the old man is still there. You're only trying with old man power. He says, get rid of it, put it off. Put off the old man. And there's a sense of freedom that comes with that. Count it true. Positionally, the old man has been crucified with Christ. And like everything in our position, the old man is absolutely, irrevocably, unchangeably, and eternally crucified with Christ. That's true. We fail to believe it. Somewhere along the line, in our faithlessness, our practice doesn't live up to that. Somehow our practice doesn't apply, doesn't really believe that the old man has been put away. And we use all sorts of excuses. And a lot of times, well, everybody's sin, I have a sad note on my phone from someone. Struggling with the flesh. Struggling with the flesh. Struggling with, they don't go into detail, but they're basically struggling with the old man. I have some hints, but I don't know where that sin has taken them. But what a confession and what a sad situation to know that to know that this person just, and I think what they're doing is and that's what I wrote back to him, I think you're trying on your own. I think you're trying in the flesh to correct the flesh. Anyway, we need to count that old man dead and buried, and we need to come back to the truth that we have the new man rather than the old man. By faith, we respond to the truth that's in Jesus. I've been taken with that little phrase, the truth in Jesus. You know what the truth in Jesus is about the old man? He's been crucified. He's been crucified. And that's how he's put off. The truth in Jesus goes on to tell us that we need to be renewed. And even this word renewed here, in point number 2, renew and I put mind the mind. Even this word renew here, only used here in the New Testament, it includes the word mind right in it. That just kind of, wow. Renew the mind. I mean, he's just saying it right in there, and then the context goes on, be renewed in the spirit of your mind. So he's taking us beyond just get your mind straightened out. No, he's got mind the mind. The mind is in there both ways. And what's interesting in the grammar here, the grammar indicates that in order for the renewing to take place, there has to be an outside influence. There has to be an outside force at work for us to renew the mind. I looked at a few other references that talk about renewing the mind. You're probably very familiar with Romans chapter 12. I haven't gone back to Ephesians yet, so I'm going to stop there and just read that to you. I know they're familiar, but he says in verse 1 and 2 of verse 12, or chapter 12 of Romans, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. There's a connection with the will of God and the renewal of the mind. Where are we going to find the will of God? The Word of God. So there's a connection with the Word of God and the will of God in that place. There's other places we could look. Titus 3:5 talks about the renewing accomplished by the Holy Spirit. The Word, the Holy Spirit. This mind renewal is done by God and His Spirit. In Colossians chapter 3 and verse 10, and we're going to look at that passage a little bit later, but in Colossians 3:10 we find the new man is renewed in knowledge. What kind of knowledge? What kind of information? God's information. Where are we going to get that? Right out of the Word of God. In 2 Corinthians chapter 4 and verse 16, he's referred to as the inner man being renewed daily. The inner man is renewed daily. You know, it's clear that something needs to change if we're going to go from the old to the new. If we're going to go from the corrupt, the rotten old man to something that's new and different. We're getting a buzz from back here somewhere. I don't know. Anyway. But anyway, the truth in Jesus is that we need to realize our mind needs to be changed. Our mind needs to be renewed. That something needs to take place. I think it's easy for us to kind of read a verse, just kind of read through it and go through it, and not allow the Word of God to affect our thinking. And the challenge here is to say, Lord, do it. Work in me. We need to allow the Lord to do His work in us, to do that renewal through His Word. And I love the various passages that we've just seen. Not just here right now, but even on a daily basis, allowing God to work. And what does He want to do? He wants to make the new man, verse 24. The idea to put on the new man. And so there's quite a difference. There's quite a difference between a raggedy old coat like this and and this sharp-looking jacket like that. No. But what a difference, what a difference between something new and something old. And he challenged us to put on, and when we see the idea of putting on the new here, it's in the same sense. It's the responsibility of the believer. It's at our feet. Put on the new. It's our responsibility, but God is the one that does it. This word for put on is used of putting on clothes many, many times, especially in the Gospels and Acts. John the Baptizer was clothed in camel's hair. He put on, that's what his garment was made out of in Mark chapter 1. Herod was arrayed in royal apparel in Acts chapter 12. So that idea is there. When the prodigal son came home, what did his dad do? He put on the best, put the best on him. Some neat pictures are drawn in that chapter. But all the time, Paul uses this word a dozen times in the New Testament, and all dozen times, Paul refers to this in a spiritual way. Every single time he talks about putting on, it's in a spiritual concept, a spiritual context. Now there's a couple of those that are going to be in eternity in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and 2 Corinthians 5. There's 3 or 4 references there, putting on immortality. This is what God does to change us to make us fit to heaven, that kind of a thing. So there's those kind of references, but then there's other references that you're probably familiar with, like Romans 15, Ephesians 6, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. They're about God's armor, putting on God's armor, God's power and God's armor. And then in Colossians chapter 3, and I want you to turn there with me, please. Colossians chapter 3. And I want you to look at this context. I challenge you to take it home with you and read through the whole context, 1 through 12 or so. But I want to jump into verse 10. Again, I kind of quoted part of it, but Colossians chapter 3 and verse 10. And it says, and have put on the new man, who is renewed in knowledge according to the image of him who created him. Who's doing this? It's Christ. Christ who created us, we're renewed in knowledge that aligns with him. The truth is in Jesus. The truth is in Jesus. The truth aligns with him. And if you go back to verse 1, I'll read that. If you then were raised with Christ, guess what? Every believer has been raised with Christ. That's the same truth in Romans chapter 6. Every believer has that Christ connection. Every believer is so connected with Christ that they have been raised with him. And if you've been raised with him, you have his life. What kind of life is that? Resurrection life. It's not just our old man life. We have resurrection life. That's what he's talking, and in fact, it has no part of the old. The old is not a part of the new at all. That's really part of the point in 2 Corinthians 5:17. When he says you're a new creation in Christ, the old is gone, boom. Where this new is not a part of the old. It's brand new, it's God created. And look what it goes on in our context well, you know what? Let me pick a couple of these other verses before we turn out of here. Go on a little bit in look at verse 4. The end of verse 3 says, your life is hidden with Christ. I'm in Colossians 3 still, sorry. Colossians 3 in verse 4. In verse 3 it ends, your life is hid with Christ in God. Your life. What kind of life? Resurrection life. The life you've been raised to. And then in verse 4, when Christ who is our life appears. Christ, our life. Skip down to verse 5 then. Therefore, in light of having been raised, in light of having resurrection life, in light of that, look at verse 5. Put to death your members which are upon the earth. And he lists them. I have some of those very same things listed on my jacket here. In verse 5, he says, put them away, or put them to death. Fornication, uncleanness, passion, that's out of the control passion, lust, evil desire and covetousness, which is idolatry. That's all part of the old. He says, put them to death. Are you supposed to go around, oh, my finger stole something, I'll chop? No. We're talking in a spiritual realm of applying the cross to the old man. Romans 6, Colossians 3. You apply the cross. If you're raised, you've already been dead. You've already been put to death. Make it a reality. Make the cross a reality in your daily walk. The cross can be a reality in your daily walk that the old man can be put off. And he lists some more things there, but let's get down to verse 10 again. In verse 10, he says, verse 9, put off the old man with his deeds. You've already done that. And have put on the new man, which is renewed in knowledge according to the image of him who created him. That idea of creation comes in. Verse 12, therefore, as the elect of God, as holy ones, as, you know what another word for holy ones, right? Saints. As holy ones, as saints, as beloved ones. Put on something new. But it's based on the truth of who you are in Christ. It's based on the truth of who you are. It's based on what God has accomplished for you in the cross. It's not you trying to scrub the old man and make him clean. No, the truth is the old man has been crucified with Christ, and we're new. It's not you trying to better yourselves and pull yourself up with your bootstraps. It's putting your faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. There's much more there. Come on back to Ephesians now, and let's pick up in our context. Ephesians chapter 4. And again, picking up, we should be in verse 24 now. So we put off the old man in 22. We have our mind renewed in 23. And that you put on the new man which is created. Oh, that's just like Colossians 3:10. Do you realize that every time this exact word for created is used in the Scripture, it's used of God's work? It's not something a man can do. It's not something a man can make. And notice what he goes on to say in verse 24. Which was created according to God in true righteousness and holiness. The idea of created according to God in righteousness and holiness. God can do nothing other. God could not create the new man any other way than in righteousness and holiness. The new man can't be anything else. And I want to point out something to you in this context. There's also a little play on words. Notice how I emphasize according to God. You know what the old man is? In the Greek, it's real easy to see. It's according to our former lifestyle. The old man is like this, according to our lifestyle. The new man is according to God. It's according to God. It aligns with God. It aligns with His righteousness. It aligns with His holiness. The new man is flawless. Bob George, in his Classic Christianity book, talks about a guy named Edward who for 50 years begged God for forgiveness. 50 years. He wasted his life begging God for forgiveness. What do you suppose his spiritual life was like? Probably pretty weak, right? I mean, he may have trusted Jesus Christ, and then he keeps begging God for forgiveness. Brethren, all the old needs to be taken to the cross. All the old needs to be put to death, counted dead, by the cross. And we need to live in our spiritual life. This guy was hanging on. He was hanging on to the old for 50 years, not believing that God has forgiven us all trespasses. Now, if I stop and think about my life, and you could probably too, you could probably think of some things that you sure wish you had never done as a believer. Those things, dwelling on those kind of failures can hold you back. Romans said, you count him dead and you're free. You count him dead and you're liberated. We're free. I read another quote there by George, and notice in his book there he says, most Christians that he talks to know that Christ's death was for sin. And it's funny as we were sharing the gospel, a few weeks ago with kids and adults and things, they would, if you'd kind of lead them to it, they would say, oh yeah, Christ died for sin. Most of them didn't have it right here and he died for my sin. There's a big difference. And more than once I quoted James where it says, when somebody gave the answer, oh, I believe in God. Do you know the devils believe and tremble? The devils believe. Are you trusting Jesus Christ for your Savior? But this message is about taking it the next step. Are you trusting Jesus Christ? Are you trusting the cross for your spiritual walk? So Bob George said, yeah, a lot of people would respond pretty well about why Christ died. But he said, just about every time I ask, well, why was Christ raised? He gets an awkward silence. Brethren, he was raised to give us new resurrected life. Resurrected life is ours. Just as salvation is ours, in Christ, by faith, we have resurrection life with Christ in our daily walk. Christ's death for our sin is just the beginning of a new life and a new relationship with Christ. But we not only died with him, we were also raised with him. Romans 6, Colossians 3, reread those passages. The Christian life is not natural life, it's supernatural life. It's God's life, it's resurrection life. That's the truth wrapped up in Jesus. The truth in Jesus is that we can put off the old, be renewed, and put on the new. That's the truth in Jesus. Have you really learned the truth in Jesus? Or are you cloaked in religion that just tries to scrub off the rough spots? The truth in Jesus is personal, just like it is for salvation. It's personal, it's relational, it's a daily walk and can impact you on a daily basis. The truth in Jesus is that he can impact every situation, even your thumb pinched in a board. We're not ragamuffins. We're clothed in royalty as children of God. And this passage just encourages us to live like it. We ought to sense it. We ought to feel it. Remember what I said? You get on those clothes and they make you feel like a new man. You've dressed for success or whatever it might be. I want you to sense in your daily walk, sense being clothed in the new man and see how it makes a difference. Let his clothes make you. Heavenly Father, we thank you just for the simple illustration that we have, or we thank you for the challenge that it is. We thank you that it's founded upon the reality of the cross. May we always come back to the cross. May we never forget May we come back to the cross in trust and confidence in you for our salvation, yes, but also for the reality of the Christian walk. May Jesus Christ be praised in and through us as he works in and through us. Amen.